thank you very much for having us here today. We're pretty excited about the work we've been doing with the Impact Genome. About 3 years ago, the Government of Ontario chose to actually put a small office in place to lead the poverty reduction strategy. We were very excited about that as well. We're a pretty small, nimble team, and our focus has been primarily on, of course, reducing poverty in Ontario, but making sure that the framework that we're using to do that is based on 11 indicators that we've created, as well as a couple of high-level targets. We're doing very well. We report out annually, and one of the pillars in the strategy is all about evidence, and that's given us a wonderful opportunity to kind of do some different things and look at things from different lenses. The Impact Genome is definitely one of the areas that we wanted to bring today, and we're talking about today, because under the evidence pillar, probably the signature piece of work that we were doing was called the Local Poverty Reduction Fund. It was a $50 million fund. I know you've probably read about it in your deck, but it was a fund actually that we created really around What Works Fund. So we were really interested in actually asking individuals and organizations to actually put together some ideas and programs that actually would then be evaluated. It was a tough sell to have a fund where we were asking nonprofits and other agencies to actually really get funded for evaluation, not necessarily another program or more staff. So that was challenging, but it was actually one of the key things that we found engaged a lot of larger organizations. They were very interested in evaluation and understanding what works. So from that, 3 years ago, we did our first call. We've done 3 different calls over the last 3 years. We have 119 programs and projects that are being funded and evaluated right now, all different levels of evaluation, RCT, pre-post, a variety. So about 2 years ago, Katharina and I looked at each other and said, okay, so like, what are we going to do when all those evaluations come in? How will we evaluate the evaluations? And so that's when we started actually trying to figure out where and who is doing impact analysis. And you know, of course, we're looking at outcomes. We want to make sure that the money we're spending is actually having a meaningful impact on individuals. So that led us to the work that we're doing today. And we're experimenting in other areas like the basic income pilot and continually working on our measurement framework for poverty. So with that, I'll ask Kat to walk through a few of these slides, and then we'd really love to have a conversation and take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak to you about this. Just quickly going through the next few slides to talk a little bit about what this little pilot proof of concept project was. As Karen mentioned, we used the Local Poverty Reduction Fund to do all these tailored individual evaluations. And we purposefully, at the time of design, did not prescribe for them a framework in which they needed to evaluate under. We didn't tell them what outcomes we wanted the local communities to tell us. What is working, what is not, what outcomes are you working towards, how do you define them, what is your evaluation approach? And here's our deputy standard card. Yeah. Okay. So because we kept it very loose, and we wanted local communities to tell us what is your innovative project and how are you going to evaluate it, we found ourselves in this situation where we had, at an aggregate, about 800 different outcomes that these organizations are trying to measure, with over 1,200 different indicators. Not to mention that they themselves often define outcomes and outputs and indicators and activities quite differently. And so when we worked with our partners at the Ontario Trillium Foundation, they are our service delivery agent for the fund, and we said, okay, well, what are we going to do? How are we, as Karen says, going to look at the aggregate impact of this fund? If my ministers and my political masters asked me, well, what has this investment do for us, other than talking about individual, well, this one program worked really well or not, we then went out to explore what types of measurement tools exist in the market space, and there isn't a lot. And I think the market too is trying to figure out how do you take individual vertical projects and a more horizontal approach which is why we were interested in the methodology or the approach that's used by Mission Measurement in the Impact Genome Project. So that's what we did in the fall. We worked with Trillium to say, let's do a proof of concept on the first round of the Local Poverty Reduction Fund, which was 41 projects and 41 grantees in about 30 different communities. And the Impact Genome Project is called a project for a reason because there are different components to how this thing works. The first thing that the founder of this tool did was to create a standardized outcomes taxonomy. And what's interesting on the way they have done this is by basically marrying the beauty of meta-analysis. And meta-analysis is a methodology and approach that really looks at a collective of research, and it's not just a literature review. And through this meta-analysis and marrying it with some innovative technology and algorithm and machine learning type, to look at it first, well, out of all the studies that are trying to look at homelessness or employment, what's the common denominator on the outcomes that they're all trying to achieve? And we're able to find consistencies across these, the studies that they had put into the Impact Genome Project, and we're able to then come out with the outcomes taxonomy. Second thing they did, we're able to, out of this vast body of research, we're able to classify it into 12 areas of impact. And I'll talk about that shortly. So on the one hand, it's about standardizing and aggregating evidence and research. And the second is a survey that they've done that they've also standardized. What that meant is that the 41 grantees that we funded on the ground had to take this survey and fill it out. The first thing that they do is a lot of descriptive information about what does the program do, how long has it been running, what is your annual program budget, how do you implement your project, and we can show you a bit about the scorecards. And when they fill out this survey, they have to identify their primary outcome. So here we are asking them in effect then to say, from the standardized outcomes taxonomy, which is the first or second outcome that you're aiming to achieve. We'll go to the next one. So out of the 12 areas of impact, we fell into 5 of them, so a little proof of concept. 5 areas, so the 12 areas of impact are education, youth development, public health, critical human needs, and so on. And these are all areas where they were able to find a large number of studies. And we said, okay, out of this mismatch of programs that we're funding in this broad bucket of poverty, what areas do we fall into? And the first cohort fell into number 1, economic development, critical human needs, which include things like housing and food security, education, systems change, and public health. So that was really interesting for us to know. And so through the proof of concept, there are a couple of products that you get from Mission Measurement. The first one is a portfolio analysis. That will be the next slide. So what's interesting, and if you look at slide 11, that talks about all 41 projects, but for the interest of time for today, we thought we would just drill into the economic development portfolio. It starts at an aggregate, and every analysis goes deeper into more detail, and I'll show you. So the first is this, where 18 of the projects that fell in the economic development area of impact, about 7,700 beneficiaries. So these are the number of people that were reached. These 18 projects had to then, as we say, identify their primary outcome. And for economic development, the main outcomes that were identified were job readiness, acquire employment, stimulate entrepreneurship, and career advancement. We can go into a lot of detail with this, so I'm just going to give you service things. So the one piece that is interesting with this project is the average efficacy rate. And the efficacy rate through this particular tool allows us to be able to compare one program against the next, because they're asking questions like, what are the number 1 people, how many people did you serve in a given year, and what is the primary outcomes that you achieved in that year? And that gives you something that you can then compare one organization against the next. It's a standard rate calculation that we use. What's interesting for us out of this is that the literature will tell us job readiness interventions are relatively straightforward to do, but actually helping people acquire a job, not necessarily. And you can see a 46% efficacy rate there. So the next slide is the next level of detail that we go down. So what you see, what's interesting with this methodology is that rather than going program by program, we start with the outcome first. So from the proof of concept in the 18 projects, 5 of them had identified acquire employment as their primary outcome. So the Toronto District School Board being on the top all the way down to the County of Wellington Circle project. And what they're doing with this portfolio or program level details is say from each of these programs how many people did they reach, what was their efficacy rate, and then what's interesting is also the quality of evidence. And so at first glance you look at the efficacy rate and you think, oh, that's the grade. I think you need to look at the information in a bundle and the direction that it's telling you. So for instance, the Toronto District School Board reaches a lot of people at a small cost per outcome of $109 per outcome. But the quality of evidence purported was level 4. And what the Impact Genome Project does is they have a level of evidence sort of grading that I provided to you in your background information. So level 1 is really high quality evidence like RCTs or quasi-experimental, all the way to level 5 is more anecdotal information. So client satisfaction surveys, for instance, would count into that bucket. So the organization, you can then see, based on the organizations, this is how many are actually trying to achieve a certain outcome, the level of evidence that they use, and their efficacy rates. And some interesting information for us to take a look at in terms of, okay, well, County of Wellington, they're trying to achieve the same outcome as the Toronto District School Board's Elevate project. Different levels of evidence, but a higher cost per element, $12,000 versus $109. But I think what the tool is showing us that it is possible to measure based on an outcome, to be able to look at how much do these outcomes cost relative to one another. And then the last piece that you get from this project, I think next slide, is a scorecard. We provided some in terms some in the appendix as well. It's a little bit small. In a nutshell, what these individual scorecards do is not only do they give you the organizational overview information on the left-hand side, but when we're starting to get into the genomic analysis, and that's what is coming from the impact genome, is that not only do they have an standardized outcomes taxonomy, but they also ask organizations to identify the key programmatic activities or mechanisms that they do that they purport achieves a certain outcome. So for instance, and why that's important is that sometimes we want to know what are the program activities that these interventions are using to get to an outcome, and some of them are based on evidence where we know, yes, these types of program elements are really important to achieving an outcome, but there might be cases where there are certain activities that an organization is doing that, you know what, maybe you're better off not doing those. And so the genes are those as I say, those programmatic elements, and then you can look at a program as a whole, and it's also core learning. So lots that we got out of this. This is the last slide. I won't go into more. The next one is sort of some key insights and future opportunities. Okay. So I think here when we're thinking about the so what, now what, there are a lot of things we learned. There's a lot still to unpack. The first is that there's a growing niche market of companies and proprietary organizations that are looking at technologies that can be used in the measurement space. Some of them are at more advanced product readiness than others, or levels of sophistication. In Ontario, we're pretty lucky. There's been a number of other impact measurement tools that have been tested or being trialed out. But again, it's the horizontal versus the vertical approach that these tools are taking. Right now, this is the only one that can give you a horizontal view of a subset of programs or projects that you have. What we've noticed and learned through this is, yes, technologies do exist that can make it much more cost effective and efficient to collect data at the right time and the right way to give you the information you need now, as opposed to waiting longer to have, basically, how long do you need to wait to get the types of evidence that you need to make informed decisions? And the level of evidence column for us, for instance, has given us a sense, okay, well, what's good enough evidence for government? We couldn't possibly expect these not-for-profit organizations to do RCTs every year. So in the absence of that, what is good enough for us moving forward? There's a growing area around social impact evaluation. And as we know, there's also a lot of work happening in the impact investing space, CIVs, social impact bonds, etc. But the world of impact investing and social outcomes measurement and evaluation need to come together much more closely if we ever want impact investing to flourish. I think there's what this enables, and this is what we're going to now be looking into moving forward, is a systems level investment. So how do we, if we look at an outcomes-based approach, using more shared language and common language across, and we're focusing on outcomes rather than bums and seat measures or very specific program infrastructure, are we able to have a more horizontal cross-cutting approach to how we're trying to reach outcomes? From a poverty perspective, we know that housing and health and training and employment are all interrelated, and we still very much vertically approach those problems. And so this is pretty exciting for us. Again, well, how can we shift it if we focus on outcomes? I think last but not least is opportunities for partnerships. So we're working quite closely with the Ontario Trillium Foundation on this work, other partner ministries, and as well as PTs, recognizing that we, I think, all share a pretty common challenge around this space, and always looking to work with people moving forward. Thank you again for your time.
So we were here last time in September. So we thought we could start to do two things. First is to give you a landscape, a bit of an update in terms of where we are with our 5 challenges, and perhaps to zero in on one of those that is actually scheduled to be launched this week, this Thursday, the 1 million clean tech. So that will keep us to that 5-minute time period for discussion. So as you can see here, those 5 challenges are identified, and just to cut to the chase in terms of the key decision points from our perspective, making sure that we're clear on what is the barrier that we're trying to address to bring those breakthrough solutions is what we try here to summarize briefly for you. But another key decision point that we were told by those who did this kind of challenge, not just in Canada but around the world, is finding the right partner and doing that co-development with them is really critical. And we certainly experienced that in our journey thus far. And you see them referenced here in the document, and I'll offer a bit of color commentary as we go through the presentation. So if you're okay, let's kind of move straight into the Women in Clean Tech announcement that will be happening right this week on Thursday in Toronto, where Minister Carr will be unveiling it officially. So the problematic there is one that is rather well known, is that the women entrepreneurs in the tech space, and clean tech in particular, are very few. About 5% or so of them are represented there. And that certainly does not render justice to the amount of innovators, female engineers, scientists, King universities, and our economy produce a large number of those, but yet they have difficulty coming from an idea to setting up an enterprise or firm that is able to carry on business. So that's what we're trying to crack here. And our partner here is Mars Discovery District, that many of you would know, based in Toronto, but also been reaching out to other clean tech associations, Canada Clean Tech, Ecotech Clean Tech in particular, as we're concerned that the francophone part of the country may be misrepresented, shall we say, by a Toronto-based outfit. And we've also been working closely with federal departments and agencies to advance this very challenge. So it will be launched this Thursday. We'll be soliciting candidacy between now and July 13th. We expect a fair amount of take-up because this is an area of interest, I think, for many entrepreneurs out there. There's an independent jury that has been established with established female entrepreneurs in the space. And just to give you a bit of flavor of the lucky ones who will end up being selected. So we're aiming to identify 5 women entrepreneurs who will be, over the course of a 2.5-year time period, be offered, I guess, 3 key elements of support. The first is living and travel expenses for that time period of 2.5 years, so they can devote themselves fully to developing their enterprise. Second, they'll benefit from all the suite of services offered by Mars. So whether it's connection with investors, getting access to market intelligence, getting communication advice, mentoring as well, They have a support that has been offered for many years, and they're quite good at it. And thirdly, they also get a ticket, a golden ticket, to access federal labs to a tune of $250,000 so that they can actually develop the technology with established scientists, with all their fancy piece of equipment and economy that they come along with it. So when they come and speak to investors and they're able to sell their gear, they actually have a shot at getting to a real kind of firm and being able to grow from it. So at the end of that 2.5-year time period, the jury again will pronounce as to which of those 5 did the best in terms of prospects for growing their firms. And they'll earn an additional reward, which is a $1 million support for their continued development of their firm. So that's the one that will be announced right this week. But perhaps I could just touch briefly on the other 4. And they are different stages of development. So perhaps we could back up to the very first slide. So on the biojet fuel one, so this is one that I'm sure you heard about. How can we make the air transportation greener, especially in terms of greenhouse gas emissions? The technology exists. There's actually biojet fuel that exists, not in commercial quantities in Canada. They're still done at a lab level. The only commercial supplier in North America is actually based in California. But the key obstacle here is cost. It costs between 3 to 7 times more than hydrocarbon-based fuel. So that obviously is a major hindrance for adoption by our airlines. And we partner with the Green Aviation Network, Garden, who comprises WestJet, Air Canada, Porter, Bombardier, a large number of innovators and universities who are partnering up with us on this, as well as we also reach out to provinces and territories and federal departments. Quite a few have a stake in it, in particular the Department of National Defense, into their own operations consume an awful lot of jet fuel, but also Transport Canada, TDS, PSPC, ISED, along with others, to try to kind of shape what that challenge could be, and look at, in particular, this notion of having mandates, so as to create that take-up factor for the development of those biojet fuel. And lastly, just to note that we're also working very closely with the government of the United States and Mexico to make this a trilateral initiative. And they're quite engaged on it. Our hope is to develop a North American research agenda that would cover this important domain. I'll be speaking to this more fully during your next session in June. Similarly, on the next one, which is the reducing the reliance on diesel in remote communities. This was announced in Budget 2017. And there, the problematic, I think, is rather well known. And we still have hundreds of communities who still depend on it to a great extent. And we'd like to assist and work with them to reduce that reliance, recognizing that there's a number of different envelopes already present with CERNA and NRCAN and other ministries. So we want to make sure that in working with our partner, in this case Pembina, and the Indigenous Clean Energy Network, that we're able to really zero in on where the needs are the greatest. And clearly there we heard loudly from Indigenous communities that capacity building in particular is a bit of a gap in our game as a federal government. Le suivant, à l'égard du système de réseau intelligent, la problématique n'est pas propre au Canada. Dans tous les pays développés, on a comme désir d'augmenter la portion d'énergie renouvelable intermittente dans notre réseau électrique. Sauf que ça pose des problèmes techniques considérables pour les gouvernements, mais aussi pour les réseaux électriques en cause. Alors on est tous à essayer de trouver des solutions en matière de storage d'énergie, de gestion de cette demande. Et de façon particulière, le partenaire, ceux de la Grande-Bretagne, suite lors d'une visite de leur Premier ministre en septembre dernier à Ottawa, ont identifié 7 problématiques comme étant un enjeu prioritaire avec M. Trudeau. Alors on vise donc lancer sous peu une co-initiative, un co-challenge, avec $10 millions de contribution de chacun des gouvernements, en collaboration avec Nesta, qui sera notre partenaire. Vous connaissez Nesta, je pense qu'il est en contact avec les membres du comité ici par le passé, qui sont basés en Grande-Bretagne également. Et le dernier d'entre eux, qui est le moins développé du groupe, c'est pour tout le secteur minier. As Anil and others would know from his experience, mining innovation system is probably the least developed, I would say, within the natural resources sectors. It's spotty and they tend to be a rather conservative bunch when it gets to adopting new technologies, yet the need, in particular, to reduce the impact on the environment is great. You think of water, tailing ponds, you think of energy use as well being a significant issue, and then disturbance, obviously. So now there's a renewed appetite, and we've seen it in their submission to the supercluster process, to trying to organize themselves and trying to be a bit bolder in terms of their environmental outcome. So we're working with them to try to shape up a challenge, which will be announced probably later in the fall.
Oui, alors c'est ça, Suzy MacDonald, je suis à Dixon, Canada, qui fait ici. Alors, je pense qu'on travaille de près avec la plupart d'entre vous, au moins avec vos équipes, mais juste pour faire un survol rapide. Alors, la crise des opiacés au Canada en 2016, on a perdu près de 3000 personnes à des surdoses. En 2017, ce nombre est rendu à plus de 4000. Parmi ces gens-là, on en a de tous les âges et ils viennent des groupes socio-économiques variés. Souvent, on croit que c'est une question de pauvreté, mais en effet, on voit avec les données qu'il y a des gens qui habitent dans des quartiers avec un revenu familial de plus de 80 000 ont des décès d'un même niveau ou plus haut même que des quartiers avec des revenus moins élevés. So it's really hitting all segments of our society. When I hear it's not me or it's not my community, that is untrue. The data tells us otherwise. And most of those deaths are amongst men. And unfortunately, opioid-related overdoses are now the leading cause of death in Canada for males ages 30 to 39. I'll just let you think about that for a second. 30 to 39-year-olds are dying as a result of opioid-related overdoses more than anything else in this country. And frankly, if you look at these numbers, and we don't see any, or we don't expect them to decrease in 2018, based on what we're seeing, we will have lost almost 10,000 people as a result of opioid-related deaths in the past 3 years. That is a shocking number. The minister has put forward a number of different initiatives, and we did get some money in budget. We're really working on increasing access to treatment, so we have $150 million that we're negotiating with provinces and territories right now to shore up access to treatment. We're certainly working on a series of innovative approaches, and we'll come back and talk about that. And we're also addressing stigma, because what we do know is the vast majority of people who die alone in their homes. So we often think that the deaths are on the downtown east side of Vancouver. That's not true. And in fact, in the downtown east side, people use drugs openly and they're saved openly. And deaths are far fewer there as a result of the changes that are being made. The deaths are still high, but when you look at the overall drug use patterns in that community versus in the rest of the country, you're more likely to die alone in your home elsewhere in the country than you are on the downtown east side. So we're not as advanced as our colleagues at NRCAN, but we are certainly taking some of your great experiences and using them as well. We have kind of 3 key areas. You'll see that they relate directly back to what the minister has put her focus on. The first and kind of the easiest one to talk about is stigma. We're using the CARET Insights platform. I don't know if any of you have it on your phone, if you're getting your free scene points to go to the movies. If not, you can download it. But what it essentially tries to do is change behavior. So we've got a small contract in place. We're trying to leverage that existing app to educate the public on stigma, to talk about the fact that drug use is a recurring health issue and it is not a moral failing, to talk about how people can get help and how families can support people in their own communities that might be suffering with substance use disorder. This one is, I think, about ready to go out, and we have a series of other things we hope to do with the CARET Insights app if the first phase is successful. So we'll do a small test. If we are successful and we can demonstrate that we're changing some behaviors and attitudes, then we'll go further with that. We have put our most energy to date on this idea of drug detection and drug checking. So PCO, NRCAN, and ourselves had a one-day workshop to look at what kinds of drug detection technology we could be using. So right now, for people who use a drug checking technology in a supervised consumption site or even in their homes, we're using a test strip that was actually intended to check for drugs, but through your urine. And right now what they're doing is they're taking a small bit of their drug, mixing it with a substance, and then checking to see if it contains fentanyl. We have evidence that says that people who do that drug checking will either reduce their dose or not use alone, and so we're able to save lives as a result. But the technology is not the best. Simon is, I can't even look at him when I talk about this because he's quite intent on making sure that people know that drug technology is not the best. So we have put out a series of grants and contributions to try and shore up like checking technology in supervised consumption sites. You may have seen it on the news just the other day, the supervised consumption site in Ottawa partnered with the university. We have a mass spectrometer in the site there to try and get better data. But we're certain that there must be some sort of handheld model that could be available that could help to test those drugs. And so through the work that we've done together, we're trying to refine that challenge to see if we can issue a challenge similar to the ones that you've just launched, so I won't go into those details. We also thought that maybe it would be a good idea to have a drug detection technology for first responders. So our first responders at risk, or our people they interact with at risk. And first responders in Canada at least have told us, we don't really need it. We're going to respond the same way regardless. If somebody's in an overdose, whether they've had fentanyl or not, or carfentanil, we will be taking the same actions. And our colleagues in the United States and Ohio have gone forward with a bit of a technology challenge around this particular element. So we've put this on hold, this particular one, until we find out more. And then finally, we're looking at opioid-related real-time data and alerts. So right now in Vancouver, people who work in overdose prevention sites and supervised consumption sites have a very active, I guess, text messaging community. And so what they do is, and you'll see it, sort of 6 overdoses in Surrey, a text message will go out to all the volunteers in all the overdose prevention sites. It's not super accurate, it doesn't work well, it's not necessarily real time. So NRCAN has been working very closely with Surrey around a real-time detection piece that could create alerts, and we could, in more real time, be able to identify overdoses that are happening and be identifying those through the paramedic system. So as the overdoses are happening or as we're reversing overdoses, we could be reporting that data. But potentially more importantly, we could have some sort of real-time alert system where when we know that fentanyl or carfentanil has hit a particular market, we could send that message out very quickly. You may have heard that in Alberta recently, in one of the First Nations community, a community of 2,000 people, there were over 60 EMS calls over the course of a weekend, and we could identify very clearly that carfentanil had hit that community. And so we were very quickly able to work with DISC and with Alberta to make sure that the word went out, that we had a very serious situation on our hands. And then finally, the last piece that we've been working quite hard on, but it's a bit tougher to get off the ground given the magnitude of it, is creating social impact bonds. And what this means is essentially that we would pay for results targeted at opioid treatment. So this is a method that's been used before by the Public Health Agency with regard to hypertension, where people paid for results in terms of lowering hypertension. So we have been working with CAN-H, the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto, and Mars as well, in kind of a two-phased approach where we look, one, to see what kind of treatment indicators would be appropriate in a pay-for-use model or pay-for-results model, and two, if we could identify something that's clear enough, we would then work with Mars to see if we could bring on board social investors that would be willing to pay for results in terms of moving people along the along the spectrum in terms of recovery from substance use disorder. So I think I'm just over my 5 minutes now.
I'm very happy to be here. Natalka Cmoc with Indigenous Service Canada. I've worked with many of you at the table, actually, at least your colleagues, as well as PCO, Impact and Innovation. And without that support, I don't think we'd be here. So we started in January developing a challenge called Building Homes and Communities Challenge. And that name is chosen specifically because we're trying to change the way we do things and the way we're programming at Indigenous services in terms of Indigenous populations, in terms of their living space. So that's where you have homes and communities. Because for Indigenous communities, their home plays a very different purpose than it does in terms of regular other parts of Canada, because we're looking at homes that serve as schools, homes that are centered to their communities, homes that are designed and should be designed with that in mind. So infrastructure challenges and the gap in Canada is growing, and our funding alone is not able to keep up with it. The mobility of Indigenous populations is changing. It's moving more and more towards the city, and our programs need to look at things a little bit with that reality. Tuberculosis is another challenge that we face and that we need to address differently, with overcrowding being a predominant reason for that. bringing families closer and building those community bonds. We can't lose sight of that, especially when people move to the cities. So with that, we're addressing this challenge with 4 communities in mind: First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and urban. So there's some principles that this design is designed with this challenge, right, that I'd like to bring to your attention. So the first one is that we're trying to create and build the challenge to be Indigenous-led. So you'll see the timelines are very tight, with the pre-launch anticipated as early as the end of May. And that is that can only happen if we're going to be building the challenge along with Indigenous communities. So once it is announced, we will be starting an outreach phase of the challenge. We'll be working with the communities to further prioritize and scope the challenge, looking at questions that should be addressed. So it could be anything from how do we innovate in a space that we are enabling communities to use their local procurement and natural resources from their communities to build their homes in their communities. It could be anything from homelessness is an issue. How do we address that? How do we make urban cities and urban spaces more welcoming to Indigenous communities? And another one would be how can we have, for example, somebody coming into the city or within their communities get treatment or escape a situation at home, yet have the services near them. Maybe it would be through multi-purpose buildings, for example. Maybe we need to look at living space a little bit more broader to encourage that. So the challenge is designed so that we can work with the Indigenous communities right from the get-go in developing the challenge itself. So that's the first phase, and we'll be setting up things like round table discussions with elders, with that in mind, to perhaps learn from a lot more from the Indigenous communities on what are some of the traditional ways that could be reflected in the designs with the funding that we provide. Then in the sort of the end of August, September would be the actual engagement session, where we would then look to prioritize some of the questions and formulate the eligibility of the challenge itself, with then the challenge being launched probably around November to encourage communities to submit ideas. Now, it's really important we have the 2 streams there, the acceleration stream and the discovery stream. It might not appear that way to the public, but we're showing it this way for today to really emphasize that all ideas will be encouraged to be submitted, so that we're creating intentionally a collaborative phase in the competition. So at the end of the day, yes, it's a challenge, but we want to build in all the support that good ideas aren't turned away. So yes, some great ideas are ready to go and would be considered in part of the challenge, but a lot of emphasis and a lot of time will also be devoted to the discovery stream. And the discovery stream is to allow for a really good idea coming from the community to be put forward and then supported through innovation labs, perhaps by working with private sectors to provide mentorship opportunities or stipends, working with universities to create those opportunities, or other academic institutions to encourage Indigenous youth in particular, 35 and under, to also contribute their ideas into the challenge. So the idea would be that ideas are submitted between November and the end of January, but an idea that maybe not be as well developed would get equal opportunity to compete for the awards. So then the awards would be awarded in May, but they would be, there's a couple of principles there that we would be mindful of. One, we would want to make sure that we have representation from every Indigenous group, so First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and we also want to make sure that there are awards dedicated to that urban space. then we would also ensure that there are awards that are getting the kind of support throughout the following years. So they would get a little bit of extra care and support, maybe partnering with, as I mentioned, universities or private sectors, and perhaps even, if we're lucky, that our funding would be considered seed money and we would have others also contribute to those awards or potentially even name their own awards and so on. And I'm not sure if I've mentioned anything, or should have mentioned something that maybe I missed.
I would just add something, is that the idea here is there is shovel-ready project that might be very innovative, and they go in the green stream, is the acceleration that we would like to push. The other stream might take much more time. We might need a 2-3 year process to get this to fruition. A good idea, but you need to organize the support for that and move the design. So we need to do both, because we know that if we only go to the acceleration, we will only make change at the margin. We really need to get people engaged and involved into this. The problem that flag at the beginning, she mentioned the gap. Mm-hmm. The gap is $30 billion size just in First Nation housing here. And what we are producing with federal program is plastic bungalow coming from the south. We have to get to a different model. The population is changing, the behavior are changing, the expectations are changing, and frankly, we have not been able, with our policies and our program, to produce anything than plastic bungalow. And we need to get there.
Just very briefly, my name is Dixon. I'm the PPE from Infrastructure Canada. So a number of the PPEs have been working on a couple of the challenges we just heard about. The one from Indigenous Services Canada, the impact-driven focus on driving social and economic outcomes through Indigenous housing investments. And then one that's focused on promoting greater harm reduction for people who use drugs through a technology-focused challenge, so the Health Canada challenge. I won't dive too deeply into the specific challenges themselves, given our time constraints, but I'll just highlight a couple of the sort of learning opportunities that PPEs have had and how we've sort of been participating in those challenges. So foremost, I would highlight that we've had an incredible opportunity to work with and learn from experts from the Nesta Challenge Prize Center. So this is an organization whose core mission really is to use the challenge model to sort of solve some of society's more intractable problems. The experts from the Prize Center have actually been guiding the PPEs, our Privy Council colleagues, as well as the lead departments, in an almost sort of step-by-step learning process from the research and design phase of the challenges right through to launch and evaluation. And this is a model that the PPEs in particular are going to be able to take back to our home departments and to illuminate where and how challenges can work across a really diverse range of files, or even on the sort of negative case where they maybe are not appropriate. Aside from being in sort of learning mode, we've also been kind of rolling up our figurative sleeves alongside the lead departments, offering our perspectives in sort of challenge planning meetings, making linkages within our own departments, and then even sort of doing some research. And this has given us both a good level of exposure as PPEs within our own departments, as well as sort of across the federal government. It's sort of a tangible way to share how PPEs are sort of interacting with various federal departments. Of course, each of the PPE's experiences is a little different. We're sort of all, I think, taking the entrepreneur title or part of our title to heart. So we're still sort of each finding our own way to participate based on our skills, our experiences, and of course our time, the amount of time we have. And I think that's going to be a sort of an ongoing challenge and an evolving process as we sort of continue to engage on these challenges. And my last point, I see Graham looking at me, hoping I'm closing. He's giving me the playoff.
10 seconds.
Yeah.
Actually, you're 20 seconds.
I will say that I think being able to sort of participate on these challenges has been really great as a sort of way to demonstrate to the PPEs that these challenges are a really incredible way or a really incredible process that we would not have been able to do maybe even 3 or 4 years ago. And so the systemic changes that this sort of task force is going to look at over the next year, I hope that we can sort of see similarly disruptive results going forward.
Thanks, Anthony. You have a 2-minute challenge.
Sorry.
We came across when we presented, came across with team creativity. And when we look at musicians, they don't innovate songs, they actually create those songs. That's because you can't innovate something that's not created yet. And so when we look at teams themselves, we have to figure out how can we bring out that creativity in teams. And first we need to feel safe, and that's building trust with each other, Next, we need to have shared experiences. And one of the things that Nesta told us that we was a diaper company, adult diapers, where the CEO felt that they weren't being innovative enough. So they got all the executives in the room, got them to put on their diapers for the first time, and they drank beer. And then they wet their pants. So they had a shared experience. Now, we didn't do that. We had but it's part of team building, which is really important. And another important item was in order to be creative, we have to be relaxed. And so with our Nesta training, they're training us as teams. And we have the grand team of everybody, but also the small sub-teams. But that's one of the big differences that I see with the Nesta training is because we're a team, we're bonding together, building together, and we're starting to become creative together. So we've gone from a spark to an actual sustained fire. And that fire is actually really important. I saw a lot of energy in the past week from a lot of entrepreneurs. We're all leading in our special ways to get things going, and we're a team now. So, but the thing is that we don't have enough fire to get the whole public service innovation going. We can set up some other fires, but what we need to do is look to the future and try and create, I call it a forest fire, of bringing up public sector innovation through unleashing the creativity of teams in public service. And that's, again, what I'm saying is from what we've learned is it's team creativity. So what I challenge everybody here today is look at your teams across the public service and see what can you do to bring out that creativity, because that's actually what from my first lesson, which I hope everybody can take here today, is instead of looking at the individuals, we need to intentionally create an atmosphere for our teams to get to this creative state. So that was my update.
Perfect. Next meeting.